A single pregnant mother found an old photo in her boss's drawer and broke down in tears. It was the love of her youth who had vanished without explanation. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you are watching from. The aroma of coffee mixed with the scent of cleaning products as Sarah Johnson pushed her cart through the silent corridors of the 30th floor of Skyline Tower. It was 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in April, and the New York rain tapped against the panoramic windows that offered a privileged view of the bustling Fifth Avenue. At 35 years old, Sarah had built a solid reputation as a corporate cleaning manager, known for her absolute discretion and impeccable efficiency. Her brown hair was tied up in a perfect bun, and her impeccably pressed navy blue uniform highlighted her upright posture, even as her 5-month baby bump became increasingly evident. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," greeted Lisa, one of the longest-serving staff members, emerging from the break room with a warm smile. "How are you feeling today? Is the baby kicking a lot?" Sarah smiled, lovingly placing her hand on her belly. "Good morning, Lisa. It's calm today, thank God. I think he likes the sound of the rain." Her voice carried that soft New York accent, tempered with the determination of someone who had faced many battles alone. The office of Smith & Associates occupied 2 entire floors of the prestigious building, with its imported marble corridors and contemporary artworks adorning the walls. Sarah knew every inch of that place, from the main conference room, with its mahogany table capable of seating 20 executives, to the small storage room in the back, where old documents rested on steel shelves. She had started there just 3 weeks ago, transferred from another client of the cleaning company, and was still adapting to the specific routine of that environment. "Sarah, can you stop by Dr. Smith's office today?" asked Lisa, consulting her clipboard. "His secretary requested a more detailed cleaning. It seems he will be receiving important clients from Europe on Friday." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange pang in her stomach. Since arriving there, she had carefully avoided the office of the senior partner, always claiming some urgency in other areas. Something about that name, Edward Smith, unsettled her inexplicably, like a familiar song that she couldn't quite identify. "Sure, Lisa. I'll leave it for the end of the morning when he isn't there." The day went on with the usual routine. Sarah supervised her team of 6 staff members, each responsible for specific areas of the office. She herself took care of the more delicate environments, the partners' offices, the law library, and the main conference room. It was a job that required not only technical competence, but also a subtle understanding of corporate dynamics, where hierarchy was respected, but tempered with genuine familiarity. Around 10 in the morning, Sarah finally headed to the office at the end of the corridor. The dark wooden door bore a golden plaque. "Edward Smith, founding partner." She knocked lightly, waited a few seconds, and not hearing a response, used her master key to enter. The environment impressed her immediately. The decor was elegant yet welcoming, with shelves filled with legal books, framed diplomas on the walls, and a brown leather armchair that suggested long hours of work. The desk was an imposing piece of rosewood, with 2 monitors, organized stacks of documents, and an ultra-thin laptop open. Sarah began her methodical work, dusting the furniture, vacuuming the Persian rug, and organizing the objects that invariably became misaligned during daily use. It was when she approached the shelf behind the desk that the unexpected happened. As she tried to reach for a higher shelf, her arm brushed against a stack of reports, knocking some papers down. As she bent down to pick them up, a movement that had become more difficult with her pregnancy, something caught her attention behind the fallen documents. It was a small gold frame that had been hidden among the files. With trembling hands, Sarah picked up the frame and turned it over. The world seemed to stop. Looking at her through the glass was the face of a 20-year-old, captured in a photo that appeared to have been taken at a college party. The smile was exactly the same as the one that had haunted her dreams for 15 years, spontaneous, contagious, full of life. The dark eyes sparkled with that mix of intelligence and mischief that had made her fall hopelessly in love during the 2 most intense years of her youth. "Ed," she murmured, her voice breaking. The photo seemed to have been taken around the same time they met, at the Spring Festival at the University of New York. She remembered that night with painful clarity. He had approached her during the performance of the guest jazz band, offering her a soda and making a joke about how she seemed more interested in the music than the party. Sarah sat heavily in the visitor's chair, still holding the frame. Her heart raced in a way that wasn't healthy for a pregnant woman, but she couldn't control the torrent of emotions that flooded her. Anger, pain, longing, confusion, all mixed in a whirlwind that threatened her carefully constructed composure over the years. Edward Smith. The full name came back to her mind like an avalanche. The law student who had promised to build a future with her, who talked about traveling across the US together, who dreamed of changing the judicial system from the inside out. The same man who, on a Monday morning in May, simply vanished from her life without a word, leaving only an empty apartment and a farewell note so terse that she doubted it had ever meant anything to him at all. "I need to leave. I can't explain. Now, but one day you understand. Forgive me." 15 words that destroyed 2 years of plans and shared dreams. 15 words that forced her to rebuild her life from scratch, changing her major at university, accepting a job at a cleaning company to support herself, and building emotional walls she thought were impenetrable. The sound of footsteps in the hallway brought her back to reality. Sarah quickly tucked the frame among the papers, just as she had found it, and resumed her cleaning with hands that still trembled slightly. But now every movement was automatic, her mind completely occupied processing. The impossible coincidence she had just discovered. Her direct boss, the man who signed her paycheck, the successful lawyer who ran one of the most respected firms in New York, was Edward. Her Edward. The same man who had abandoned her 15 years ago, and who now, by a cruel twist of fate, had become a constant presence in her life again. And she was 5 months pregnant by another man. The weekend passed like a blur of anxiety and insomnia. Sarah tossed and turned in her 2-bedroom apartment in the Brooklyn neighborhood, one hand always resting on her belly. As her mind worked incessantly, the baby seemed to sense her agitation, kicking more than usual, as if protesting against his mother's emotional turmoil. "Calm down, my love," she murmured, making circular motions over her stretched skin. "Mommy is just processing some things." On Monday, Sarah arrived at the office 20 minutes late, something unprecedented in her 15-year career. Lisa greeted her with a worried look at the employee reception on the ground floor of the building. "Sarah, are you okay? You look like you didn't sleep well," her colleague observed, noticing the dark circles that even makeup couldn't completely hide. "It's the baby, Lisa. He's been very active at night." Sarah forced a smile, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "You know how it is, right? They get more active towards the end of the pregnancy." 5 months isn't the end yet, girl," Lisa laughed, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure everything is all right? I can cover some floors for you today?" "No need, thanks. I'll be fine." But Sarah wasn't fine. As she pushed her cart down the familiar hallways, each step brought her closer to the 30th floor, where Edward's office awaited her like a ticking time bomb. She had spent the entire weekend devising strategies to avoid him, memorizing his schedule from the agenda Lisa had shared with her. "Dr. Smith always arrives at 8:30, Lisa had explained the previous Friday. "He usually has lunch out between noon and 2. And on Mondays he has a meeting with the board at 3 in the afternoon, which lasts about 2 hours. At 9 in the morning, Sarah ascended to the 30th floor with her heart in her throat. The hallway was quiet, but she could hear muffled voices coming from the main office. She decided to start with the executive restrooms, hoping the morning meeting would last long enough for her to finish the entire area without running into him. For 2 weeks, the strategy worked perfectly. Sarah developed a precise choreography of evasion, always consulting Ms. Carter, the floor receptionist, about the daily schedule before starting her work. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," Sarah greeted every morning, stopping at the mahogany desk strategically positioned at the entrance of the executive floor. "Good morning, dear. How's the baby today?" Miss Carter was a 58-year-old lady, her grey hair always impeccably styled, who had worked in the office for over 15 years. Her kind blue eyes and maternal voice had won the affection of all the employees. "He's fine, thank you. Do you know if Dr. Smith will be in the office this morning?" Ms. Carter checked the electronic agenda, always helpful. "He has a video conference with clients from London at 10, which should last until noon. Then he goes out for lunch with the merger team from Exxon. I think you have the morning free." But Sarah's strategy had a flaw she hadn't anticipated. Ms. Carter was watching. The receptionist, with her decades of experience dealing with the complexities of the corporate environment, immediately noticed the strange pattern. "Lisa," Miss Carter called on Wednesday of the second week, when the cleaning team took their coffee break at 3 in the ground floor pantry. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" The 2 women stepped away from the group, Ms. Carter holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a curious expression on her face. "Is Sarah avoiding Dr. Smith?" she asked directly without preamble. Lisa nearly choked on her coffee. "What do you mean, Ms. Carter?" "She always asks about his schedule before cleaning the floor, and I've noticed she never works in his office when he's present. It seems she knows his hours better than his own secretary." "Oh, I don't know," Lisa deflected, but her expression betrayed that Ms. Carter's observation had hit the mark. "Maybe she just wants to avoid interrupting his work, right? You know how professional Sarah is." Ms. Carter wasn't convinced, but she didn't press the issue. However, her curiosity was piqued. In the following days, she began to observe Sarah more closely, noticing how the young woman tensed whenever Edward unexpectedly appeared in the hallway, how she averted her gaze when he passed, how her hands trembled slightly when she had to clean something near his office door. On Thursday of Sarah's 3rd week at the office, her careful plan crumbled. She was cleaning the conference room when she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. By the cadence, firm, slightly hurried steps with the characteristic echo of expensive dress shoes on marble, she immediately recognized it was Edward. But according to Ms. Carter, he should have been in an external meeting until 4 in the afternoon. Sarah hid behind the slightly open door of the room, meetings peering through the crack, and then he saw him. 15 years had been kind to Edward Smith. At 37, he maintained the same athletic build of his youth, but now with the confident posture of someone who had achieved professional success. His dark brown hair was shorter, with a few grey strands at the temples that added an air of distinction. The navy suit was clearly tailored, perfectly cut to fit his 6'1" frame. But it was his eyes that impressed her the most, the same dark, expressive eyes from 20 years ago, now tempered with a mature intensity that spoke of tough decisions and heavy responsibilities. "Ms. Carter, the meeting ended early," he said, stopping at the reception. His voice had the same deep tone as always, but now carried the natural authority of someone used to being heard and obeyed. "The oil company will need more time to review our proposal. Could you cancel the 5 o'clock video conference? I'll take the opportunity to catch up on paperwork." "Of course, Dr. Edward, I'll cancel it right away. Oh, and the cleaning crew is still on the floor. Do you want me to ask them to come back later?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. It was then that Edward said something that made her freeze. "No need. By the way, Miss Carter, can you tell me about the new cleaning manager? Lisa mentioned we had a team change. Oh, Sarah. She's an excellent professional, Dr. Edward. Very discreet, very efficient, and so polite. Always asks about your schedule so she doesn't disturb. Edward slightly furrowed his brow. Sarah what? Sarah Johnson. Why do you ask? There was a silence that lasted for a few eternal seconds. Sarah, still, hidden, saw Edward freeze as if struck by lightning. Sarah Johnson, he repeated slowly as if testing the sound of the words. That's right. Do you know her? Another silence. Sarah could see Edward's profile from the meeting room door and watched a series of emotions cross his face. Surprise, recognition, something that could be joy, immediately followed by an expression of panic. No, I don't know her, he lied, but his voice sounded strange. It's a beautiful name. Ms. Carter looked at him with renewed curiosity, but before she could ask more questions, Edward quickly headed to his office. Sarah waited until she heard the door close before emerging from her hiding spot, her legs shaky. He had reacted to her name. After 15 years, Edward still remembered her. But the question that tormented her was, what would he do now with this information? In the following weeks, the office transformed into an emotional minefield for Sarah. Edward seemed to be everywhere, emerging from elevators when she least expected it, passing through the halls at times he should have been in external meetings, appearing in the break room when she went to grab cleaning supplies. It was as if he had memorized her routine and was deliberately crossing her path. Sarah, are you sure you're okay? Lisa asked for the third time that week, watching how her friend dropped a bottle of cleaning solution upon seeing Edward walk down the hall. You seem very nervous. I'm fine, Lisa. It's just the fatigue from the pregnancy, Sarah lied, picking up the shards of glass with trembling hands. What she didn't know was that Edward was going through a similar emotional whirlwind. After discovering that the new cleaning manager was Sarah Johnson, the Sarah from his youthful dreams, he found himself unable to concentrate on work. 15 years of professional success, achievements, and recognition seemed insignificant in the presence of her just a few meters away. Dr. Smith, Jessica, his personal secretary, had knocked on the office door 3 times before receiving a response. You forgot about the meeting with the mining clients. They've been waiting in the conference room for 20 minutes. Edward diverted his eyes from the window, where he had been discreetly watching Sarah supervise her team in the building's courtyard. She was sitting on a wooden bench near the fountain, explaining something to 2 younger employees, one hand always resting affectionately on her pregnant belly. Sorry, Jessica, can you tell them I'm on my way? But his mind was completely occupied with questions that didn't involve mining or corporate contracts. Sarah was pregnant. 15 years after disappearing from his life, Edward was finding her again, carrying another man's child. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. It was Ms. Carter who first noticed the change in behavior from both of them. The receptionist, with her experience in observing the complexities of human interactions in the corporate environment, began to connect the strange dots. Sarah always asking about Edward's schedule, Edward suddenly interested in the cleaning crew's timings, the furtive glances he didn't think she noticed. Something is going on here, Ms. Carter murmured to herself while organizing the mail. It was then that she decided to do a little investigation on her own. The following Friday, Ms. Carter waited until Edward left for lunch and headed to the archives on the 29th floor, where the company's old documents were stored. As a receptionist for over 15 years, she had unrestricted access to practically every sector of the office. Let's see, she murmured, searching through the dusty folders. If there's any story between these two, it might be in the old records. It took 2 hours of meticulous searching, but Ms. Carter finally found what she was looking for. In a box of documents from 2009, she discovered the records of an unpaid internship that Edward had done at the office during college. And there, in the personal references that all interns were required to provide, was the name Sarah Johnson, girlfriend, emergency contact. "I knew it!" Miss Carter exclaimed quietly, quickly storing the document. Now, everything made sense. The palpable tension between them, the strange behaviors, the coincidences that weren't coincidences. Miss Carter was a woman who believed in destiny and second chances at love. She had lost her own. 10 years after losing her daughter in a car accident, she considered herself a sort of adoptive mother to all the younger employees in the office. Seeing Sarah, pregnant, obviously vulnerable, working hard to support herself, and Edward, successful but clearly unhappy since the divorce, awakened a maternal protective instinct in her. She decided it was time for a little intervention. The following Monday, Ms. Carter put her plan into action. First, she accidentally scheduled an emergency maintenance for the building's elevators from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, exactly when Sarah was cleaning the executive offices and Edward usually returned from lunch. "Sarah, dear," Ms. Carter said when the young woman arrived on the 30th floor at 2:15, "the elevators are under maintenance. You'll have to use the service stairs to go down. But don't worry, it's just for today." Sarah nodded, unaware of anything amiss, focused on finishing quickly to avoid any encounter with Edward. But Ms. Carter had calculated everything. She knew exactly what time Edward would return from lunch and which route he would take. At 2:45, Edward climbed up the main staircase. After all, the elevators were under maintenance, carrying a heavy briefcase full of documents and thinking about the corporate merger that had occupied his mind for the past few days. It was on the 17th floor that it happened. Sarah was descending the same staircase, pushing her cleaning cart and being extra careful due to her pregnancy, when one of the cart's wheels got stuck. The equipment tilted dangerously to the side, and Sarah lost her balance. "Watch out!" Edward dropped his briefcase immediately, taking 3 steps at a time to catch her before she fell. For a moment they froze. Edward held Sarah by the arms, their faces just inches apart, the cleaning cart forgotten between them. It was the first time in 15 years that they had touched. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Edward." They knew each other intimately and deeply, but now they looked at each other like strangers. Edward saw the changes the years had brought. Sarah was thinner, with small wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of worries and hardships, but she remained beautiful, with the same intelligent and determined expression that had made him fall in love in his youth. And now she carried another person's life within her. Sarah noticed how Edward had become a successful man. The expensive suit, the Swiss watch, the confident posture, all spoke of a life very different from hers. But his eyes remained the same, deep, expressive, capable of making her forget the world around. "Are you okay? And the baby?" he asked, his hands still on her arms. I'm fine," Sarah stammered, trying to pull away. "It was just a scare." "Sarah, Edward began, but she interrupted him. "No." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Not now. Not here." She stepped away from him, straightened the cart, and continued down the stairs without looking back. Edward stood frozen in place for long minutes, watching her disappear, his mind in turmoil. From the floor above, hidden behind the stairwell door, Miss Carter smiled in satisfaction. The first contact had been made. Now it was a matter of patience and a few more carefully orchestrated coincidences. But Miss Carter was not the only one watching. Across the hallway, Jessica had witnessed the entire scene through the glass window of the conference room. And unlike Ms. Carter, her intentions were far from benevolent. Jessica Moreira had worked as Edward's executive assistant for 3 years, and during that time she had cultivated much more than professional admiration for her boss. At 29, blonde, always impeccably dressed in designer clothes and holding an MBA in business administration, she considered herself the perfect candidate to be the next Mrs. Smith. Edward's divorce 2 years earlier had fueled her hopes that he would finally notice her discreet hints and invitations for work dinners. But now, watching the scene in the stairwell through the window, Jessica felt a cold fury take over her chest. The way Edward had held that woman, the intensity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his voice when he said her name, Jessica immediately recognized the signs of a man confronted with his romantic past. "So that's how it is," she murmured to herself, her fingers nervously drumming on the table. That same afternoon, Jessica began her own investigation. Unlike Ms. Carter, her intentions were purely destructive. She started by researching Sarah Johnson on social media, discovering the young woman's Instagram profile with sparse posts from the last few months, photos of her growing belly, some landscapes from the neighborhood of Brooklyn, images of crochet she made in her spare time. It was in a post from 3 weeks ago that Jessica found the first clue she was looking for. Sarah had posted a photo of herself holding an ultrasound with the caption, "20 weeks of our miracle." In the comments, a man named Brian Carter had written, "I can't wait to meet my child, love. We'll be together again soon." "Interesting," Jessica murmured, clicking on Brian's profile. The man, appearing to be around 32 years old, had a profile filled with photos in gyms, luxury cars, and trips to paradise beaches. But the most revealing detail was his location. Miami, Florida. Jessica quickly connected the dots. Sarah was pregnant by a man who lived in another city, likely a relationship that had ended badly. This explained why she was working in New York, far from the child's father. Armed with this information, Jessica decided to take the next step. The following Thursday, she approached Lisa during the coffee break. "Lisa, can I ask you a personal question?" Jessica began with her most friendly voice. "Of course, dear. What is it?" "About Sarah. Is the father of her baby around? I see her a bit sad and I worry." Lisa, who had developed a maternal affection for Sarah, sighed deeply. "Oh, it's a complicated story, you know. The father of the child lives in Florida. They broke up when she told him about the pregnancy. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and, well, you know how it is." "Wow, that's sad." Jessica feigned perfect compassion. "So she's alone then?" "For now, yes, but Sarah is strong. She always has been. She'll manage." Jessica stored every word, mentally constructing her plan. In the following days, she carefully observed the behavioral patterns of Edward and Sarah, noting how they avoided each other but, at the same time, always seemed aware of each other's presence. It was the following Friday that Jessica decided to test her suspicions. Edward was in his office, trying to concentrate on a merger contract when she entered with a stack of documents. "Dr. Edward, I need you to sign these contracts," she said, positioning herself strategically near the window where the courtyard could be seen. "Sure, Jessica, just leave them here." "Actually, it would be better if you checked them now. They're important documents from ExxonMobil." Edward sighed, but took the papers. It was then that Jessica made her move. "Oh, Dr. Edward, speaking of employees, the new cleaning manager is doing an excellent job, don't you think?" Edward's hand hesitated over the signature. "Sarah? Yes. She seems very competent." "Sarah indeed. What a sad story she has, right? Pregnant, alone, abandoned by her boyfriend." Jessica watched every micro-expression on Edward's face. "Lisa told me that the father of the child lives in Florida. Just imagine getting pregnant and being abandoned like that." Edward dropped the pen. "Jessica, I don't think it's appropriate for us to discuss the personal lives of employees. Of course, sorry, Dr. Edward. It's just that we end up getting attached, right? She's so dedicated, working late even while pregnant. Working late? Edward frowned. Yes, I saw her here until around 7 last night. She must really need the extra money. You know how it is, single mother. Edward was silent for a few seconds. Jessica, can you check if we're overloading the cleaning staff? It's not necessary for them to work beyond normal hours. Sure, I'll talk to their supervisor. Jessica left the office with a satisfied smile. She had achieved exactly the reaction she expected. Edward was clearly concerned about Sarah, protecting her even without realizing it. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own demons. The encounter on the staircase had shattered the emotional barrier she had carefully built over 3 weeks. Now, every time she entered the 30th floor, she felt her heart race, her hands grow clammy, and her breathing become more difficult. Sarah, are you sure you don't want to tell me what's going on? Lisa insisted on the following Monday, finding her friend silently crying in the break room. It's nothing, Lisa, just the pregnancy hormones. But Lisa had known Sarah for over a year, since she had been transferred from another client. She knew the young woman was strong, determined, and rarely let anything shake her. Seeing her in that state deeply worried her. Sarah, look at me. Lisa took her friend's hands. You know you can trust me, right? If there's something going on at work, some problem with an employee, it's not that, Lisa, I swear. Is it the babies? Father, is he bothering you again? Sarah quickly raised her eyes. Why do you ask that? Jessica was asking questions about you the other day, about the baby's father if you were alone. It seemed strange to me. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What kind of questions? Nothing major. I think it was just feminine curiosity. But now, seeing you like this... Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. She needed to pull herself together. She needed to protect not only herself, but also the baby she was carrying. She couldn't allow emotions related to Edward to affect her ability to work and support herself. Lisa, I need to ask you something, she said, her voice becoming firmer. Can you avoid talking about my personal life with other people? Anyone? Of course, dear. Sorry if I said too much. It wasn't your fault, it's just that it's better to keep things separate, you know, work and personal life. But Sarah knew it was already too late. Somehow her presence had been noticed, her story was being investigated, and the past she so desperately wanted to keep buried was being unearthed by people who had no idea of the forces they were setting in motion. That night, in her quiet apartment, Sarah sat in the second-hand armchair she had bought, one hand on her belly, watching the rain pour down the window. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anguish. "What are we going to do, little one?" she murmured. "Your mommy didn't expect life to get so complicated again." The month of May brought an even tenser atmosphere to the Smith & Associates office. Sarah had developed an almost military routine to avoid Edward, arriving earlier, leaving later, memorizing every move he made through the information that Ms. Carter unconsciously shared. But the stress was taking its toll. She had lost weight in her face and arms, even as her belly grew, and dark circles had become a permanent feature. "Sarah, you need to see a doctor," Lisa insisted on the morning of a grey Thursday. "It's not normal for a pregnant woman to lose weight like this." "I'm going for my routine checkup on Friday, Lisa. Don't worry." But Sarah was worried. In the last week, she had felt some irregular contractions that her obstetrician, Dr. Paula Johnson, had classified as normal but worth monitoring. The doctor had been clear: less stress, more rest, regular nutrition. "You're working too much, Sarah," Dr. Paula had said during the appointment. "I know it's difficult in your situation, but the baby is being affected by your stress." Ironicamente, it was while trying to follow medical advice that Sarah found herself in the most dangerous situation since discovering Edward's identity. Miss Carter had organized a small informal gathering in the break room on the 30th floor to celebrate the 60th birthday of John, the building's security coordinator. It was a Friday afternoon, the office traffic had decreased, and Sarah thought it would be safe to attend for a few minutes. After all, Edward had left for a hearing and wouldn't return until 6 o'clock. The break room had been decorated with colourful balloons, and there was a simple chocolate cake that Ms. Carter had bought from the bakery on the ground floor. About 15 employees squeezed into the small space: receptionists, cleaning staff, security, and a few secretaries from the lower floors. "Sarah, it's great to see you," exclaimed John, a black man with white hair and a generous smile. "How's the baby?" "Growing, John," Sarah smiled, accepting a small piece of cake. "Kicking a lot." "Ah, then he's going to be a football player," the man laughed, "just like my grandson." It was a rare moment of lightness for Sarah. Surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her, without social masks or professional tensions, she managed to relax for the first time in weeks. She was laughing at a joke that Ms. Carter was telling about her early days in the office when she heard the familiar voice in the hallway. "Ms. Carter, are you there?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Edward had returned early. Everyone in the break room turned to the door, but Sarah positioned herself behind John, trying to use the tall man as a shield. Her heart raced so violently that she felt a pang in her chest. "Dr. Edward," Ms. Carter called out to the door, "did the hearing end early?" "The judge postponed it to Monday," Edward explained, appearing in the break room entrance. He looked a bit rumpled, his tie slightly loose, and he carried a brown leather briefcase. "I heard voices and thought, oh, it's John's birthday." "That's right, Dr. Edward. Would you like a piece of cake?" Ms. Carter offered. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. The break room was too small, Edward was blocking the only exit, and she was starting to have difficulty breathing. The stress of the past weeks, combined with the sudden shock, was triggering a physical reaction that she couldn't control. "Of course, I'd love to." Edward began to step into the break room, but stopped abruptly when his gaze found Sarah behind John. For a moment that felt eternal, they stared at each other. Edward immediately saw that something was wrong. Sarah was pale, one hand pressed against the wall, the other on her chest, her breathing clearly altered. "Sarah," he said instinctively, taking a step toward her. That was when she crumbled. The contractions came all at once, strong and painful, making her double over. Dizziness hit her like a wave, and she felt her legs give way. "Sarah!" Lisa shouted, dropping the plate to support her friend, but it was Edward who reached her first. In 2 long strides, he crossed the break room and caught Sarah before she fell, carefully lowering her to the ground. "Call an ambulance," he ordered, his voice automatically taking on a commanding tone. "Now!" "No, I don't need to," Sarah murmured, trying to get up. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Edward said firmly, kneeling beside her. "You're having contractions and obviously in severe stress." His hands found hers naturally, and Sarah didn't have the strength to pull away. The pain in her abdomen was increasing, and she was starting to panic. "My baby," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Please, my baby." "Your baby will be fine," Edward said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Breathe with me, Sarah, just like you did in yoga, remember?" She looked at him in surprise. He remembered the yoga classes they took together in college 15 years ago. "Inhale through your nose," he instructed, demonstrating. "Hold for 3 seconds. Exhale through your mouth." Sarah instinctively obeyed, focusing on his voice as an anchor amid the chaos. Gradually, the contractions began to decrease in intensity. "The ambulance is on its way," Ms. Carter informed, having called immediately. "I don't want to go to the hospital," Sarah murmured. "I can't lose my job." "Sarah, Look at me. Edward held her face with both hands, forcing her to make eye contact. Your job is secure, I promise, but right now, you need to take care of yourself and your baby. Why do you care? The question slipped out before she could censor herself, loaded with all the pain and confusion of the last 15 years. Edward hesitated for a moment, aware that everyone in the break room was watching and listening to every word, because, he paused, visibly struggling with the words, because I never stopped caring. The silence that followed was broken only by the arrival of the paramedics. Edward reluctantly stepped back as they examined Sarah, but he remained close, answering medical questions about what had happened. I'm going with her, Lisa declared, grabbing her bag. I'm going too, Edward said, surprising everyone. Dr. Edward, you don't have to, Ms. Carter began. Yes, I do, he interrupted, looking directly at Sarah as she was placed on the stretcher. I need to make sure she's okay. Sarah wanted to protest. She wanted to say that he had no right to worry about her after 15 years of absence. But another contraction hit her, and all she could do was close her eyes and let them take her. At the hospital, Edward remained in the waiting room while Sarah was examined. Lisa tried to convince him to return to the office, but he firmly refused. Dr. Edward, Lisa finally said after 2 hours of silent waiting, can I ask you a question? Of course. Did you know Sarah before? Before she started working at the office? Edward was silent for so long that Lisa thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he finally said, his voice low. I did. And is that why she has been acting so strange lately? Probably. Before Lisa could ask more questions, Dr. Paula Johnson appeared in the waiting room. The family of Sarah Johnson. That's us, Edward replied immediately, standing up. The doctor looked at him with curiosity, but did not comment on his response. Sarah and the baby are fine. It was a severe stress episode that caused premature contractions, but we managed to control them. She will need to be under observation tonight. Can I see her? Edward asked. Only 2 visitors are allowed at a time. You are... I'm her best friend, Lisa replied quickly. And I am... Edward hesitated. I am the father. The silence that followed Edward's declaration echoed through the waiting room of Skyline Hospital like a gong. Lisa stared at him with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open, trying to process what she had just heard. What do you mean by that? She murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Dr. Paula Johnson looked from Edward to Lisa, clearly confused by the dynamics of the situation. Well, if you want to see the patient, she is in room 412, but please keep the visit calm. She needs complete rest. As the doctor walked away, Lisa turned to Edward with a mix of shock and indignation. Dr. Edward, I don't understand. The father of Sarah's baby lives in Florida. His name is Brian Carter. I saw their conversations on her phone. Lisa, Edward interrupted, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair. It's complicated. Complicated how? Did you lie to the doctor? Edward sat heavily in one of the blue plastic chairs in the waiting room, the weight of 15 years of secrets and lies finally taking its toll. I didn't lie, he said slowly. At least, not completely. Lisa sat next to him, her expression shifting from indignation to concern. During the year she had known Sarah, she had genuinely grown fond of the young woman, seeing in her the daughter she never had. Dr. Edward, you need to explain this to me properly. Sarah is like a daughter to me. Edward looked down at his hands, struggling against all the promises he had made to himself to keep the past buried. Sarah and I, we dated 15 years ago in college, for 2 years. 15 years? Lisa quickly calculated. So you met when you were 20 and 22. I was in my 4th year of law. She was in her 2nd year of education. Edward's voice softened, laden with memories. We met at a party at the University of New York. She was sitting alone, reading a book amidst the chaos. Lisa remained silent, sensing that she needed to let him speak. I fell in love with her in our first conversation, Edward continued. Sarah has always been special, intelligent, determined, with an inner strength I've never seen in anyone else. We planned everything together. To marry after graduation. She wanted to teach in public schools. I dreamed of becoming a district attorney. And what happened? Edward closed his eyes, as if the memory were physically painful. My father found out about the relationship. Robert Smith was not just a successful lawyer, he was a man obsessed with social status. He discovered that Sarah came from a humble family. Her father was a doorman, her mother a cleaner. To him, it was unacceptable for his son to be involved with someone from a lower class. My God, Lisa murmured. He gave me an ultimatum. Break up with Sarah or be disinherited and lose the full scholarship he had secured for me at Yale. I was 22, Lisa. I thought I could stand up to my father, that I could choose love. But you didn't. Choose. Edward opened his eyes, and Lisa saw tears he was struggling to hold back. I chose. I told him I would marry Sarah with or without his approval. That's when he played his final card. Edward paused as if the next words were too poisonous to utter. He said he had hired a private investigator to look into her family, that he had discovered Sarah's father was involved with drugs, that he had debts with traffickers. He said that if I didn't end the relationship, they would take care of the problem in their own way. He was threatening her family. He was, and I believed him. My father had connections with dangerous people through some clients. I couldn't risk Sarah's life or her family's. Lisa felt a pang of understanding, but also of anger. So you just disappeared. I packed my things one Monday morning and left. I only left a note. I thought it was better for her to hate me than to put her in danger. And you went to Yale. I did. I spent 5 years there, specializing in corporate law, building the career my father wanted for me. But not a day went by without me thinking of her. Edward looked up at Lisa. When I returned to the U.S. 8 years ago, I tried to find her. I hired detectives, scoured social media, reached out to former classmates from the University of New York. Nothing. It was as if Sarah Johnson had simply disappeared from the world. She changed her major, Lisa murmured. After you left, she dropped education and went to study business administration at a private college. She worked during the day to pay for her studies. Edward looked at her in surprise. How do you know that? Because Sarah told me. She said she had a boyfriend in her youth who broke her heart, and because of that, she decided to completely change her life. I never imagined it was you. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the revelation hanging between them. Dr. Edward, Lisa finally said, you said you are the father of the baby. But that's impossible. Sarah met Brian less than a year ago, and I'm not the biological father, Edward interrupted. But when I told the doctor I was the father, I meant that I would like to be. The brutal honesty. The confession left Lisa speechless. 15 years, Lisa. 15 years imagining what our life together would be like, what children we would have, what family we would build. When I found out that Sarah was here, pregnant, it felt like the universe was giving me a second chance. But she doesn't know any of this. She doesn't know that my father lied about the threats. She doesn't know that I tried to find her. To her, I'm just the coward who abandoned her without explanation. Before Lisa could respond, a nurse approached them. Family of Sarah Johnson. She is awake and asking for her friend. Lisa stood up, but Edward hesitated. Go with her, he said. I'll wait here. Dr. Edward, Lisa turned before following the nurse. Are you going to tell her the truth? I don't know if I have that right, not after 15 years. Everyone has the right to the truth, Lisa said firmly, especially someone we love. 15 minutes later, Lisa returned to the waiting room with a grim expression. She wants to talk to you. Edward stood up immediately. How is she? Physically stable, emotionally. Lisa shook her head. She heard when you told the doctor that you were the father. A nurse accidentally mentioned it. My God! Dr. Edward, she is very confused and hurt. Please, be gentle with her. Edward nodded and headed to the elevator, his legs trembling slightly. 15 years of regret and longing had led to this moment, a conversation that could change everything or destroy any chance of redemption he might still have. Room 412 was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the hospital gardens. Sarah was sitting on the bed, wearing a light blue hospital gown, one hand always protectively, resting on her belly. She had washed her face, combed her hair, and managed to partially regain her composure. But Edward could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "Hi," he said hesitantly, stopping at the entrance. "You can come in," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Edward approached slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might flee at any sudden movement. "How are you?" "Fine. The baby is fine." A pause. "Thank you for helping me today." "Sarah, the nurse said you introduced yourself as the father of my child." Her voice remained calm, but Edward could see the storm behind her eyes. "I would like to know why." Edward sat down in the chair next to the bed, his hands nervously clenching and unclenching. "Because when I saw you there, unwell, carrying a child, all I wanted was to protect both of you." "Edward, you don't have the right—" "I know," he interrupted. "I know I don't have the right to care, to want to protect you, to be here, but I can't help it." Sarah studied him in silence for long moments. "Why did you leave?" she finally asked, her voice breaking slightly. "After 2 years together, why did you just disappear?" Edward knew the moment of truth had come, but looking at Sarah, pregnant, vulnerable, still recovering from a stressful episode he had helped cause, he wondered if she could bear to hear about his father's manipulations, about threats that didn't even exist. "Sarah," he began slowly, "there's a lot you don't know about that time." Sarah raised her hand, interrupting Edward before he could continue. "No," she said, her voice gaining a firmness he didn't expect. "I don't want to hear explanations now, not here, not like this." Edward leaned forward in the chair, frustration evident on his face. "Sarah, please, you need to understand." "I need to understand?" Her voice rose slightly, and she made a conscious effort to calm herself, remembering where she was and the delicate state of the baby. "Edward, you had 15 years to give me explanations. 15 years." She adjusted the pillows behind her, wincing slightly with the movement. The IV dripped slowly into her left arm, and the monitors emitted soft, steady beeps. "Do you know what I did after you left?" she asked, looking out the window toward the hospital gardens. "I waited for 3 whole months. I waited for you to come back. I checked my email dozens of times a day. I slept with my phone under my pillow in case you called. I made up 1,000 excuses for why you disappeared." Edward closed his eyes, guilt weighing on him like liquid lead. "I thought you had been kidnapped. I called hospitals, police stations. Your father told me you were following your destiny and slammed the door in my face." Sarah turned her face to him, and Edward saw unshed tears shining in her eyes. "That's when I finally understood that you had simply abandoned me. Sarah, do you know how many times I changed colleges? 3, because every place reminded me of you. I dropped out of education, that dream of changing the world through education that we shared. I paid to study business administration at a private college while working as a cleaner. The irony did not go unnoticed by either of them. I worked in stores, offices, building maintenance, anything that would give me money to survive and study. I built an entire life without you, Edward, a life that works, that gives me dignity, that allows me to support my child. Edward forced himself to ask, even though the answer could destroy him. Did you love someone else? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Loved? You mean, did I manage to trust someone enough to love after you taught me that promises mean nothing? That's not fair. Not fair? Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. You know what's not fair? You showing up in my life now, when I'm pregnant and vulnerable, when I've built an emotional stability that took me years of therapy to achieve. Edward remained silent, knowing she was right. Brian, Sarah continued, mentioning the biological father of the baby, was not a love. It was a desperate attempt to prove to myself that I was still capable of trusting someone. And look how it ended. What happened between you two? Sarah hesitated, as if deciding how much to share. We met last year in a business management course that the cleaning company offered. He was visiting New York for work. Charming, attentive, different. She paused, running her hand over her belly. For 4 months he flew to New York every weekend. He talked about moving here, about us building something together. Edward felt a pang of jealousy that he had no right to feel. When I found out I was pregnant, I called him immediately. I thought it would be a good surprise. After all, we always talked about family, about the future. Sarah's voice grew quieter. He asked for time to process the information. A week later, he sent a message saying he wasn't ready to be a father, that our relationship had been premature. He abandoned you while you were pregnant? Not exactly. He offered money to solve the problem. When I refused, he said he would respect my decision, but that it wasn't part of his plans. Edward felt intense anger rising in his chest. How could someone abandon Sarah and his own child? Is that why you're in New York alone? I'm in New York because this is where I can work, support myself and raise my child. The cleaning company offered me a promotion to manager, a better salary. New York has more opportunities. They remained silent for a few minutes, the weight of 15 years of separate lives hanging between them. Sarah, Edward finally said, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but have you ever thought about giving me a chance to explain what really happened? For what? She asked, tired. For you to tell me how hard it was to choose between me and your career, how Yale was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, how I didn't fit into your future plans. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? Sarah turned completely to him, challenging him. Tell me, Edward, how did you decide that 2 hours of conversation with your father were worth more than 2 years with me? Edward opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain that he believed he was protecting her? How could he talk about the threats he now knew were false without sounding like he was making excuses? It was, complicated, he said lamely. Sarah laughed again, the sound even more bitter than before. You know what, Edward? I think the simple explanation is the true one. You were young, ambitious, and when it came time to choose between love and success, you chose what seemed safer. Sarah, no. And that's okay, she continued, her voice growing firmer. People make choices. You made yours. I made mine. We built different lives. But now you're my boss, and I'm your employee. That's all. The final tone in her voice made Edward understand that the conversation had come to an end. He slowly stood up, feeling as if he had aged 10 years in the last 2 hours. Sarah, I want you to know that your job is secure. Regardless of anything between us, you are an excellent professional. "Thank you," she said formally. "And if you need anything, medical leave, time off for appointments, I'll talk to HR." Edward nodded, understanding that he was being dismissed. He reached the door of the room but turned one last time. "Sarah, I never stopped loving you." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw a mix of pain and anger in her eyes. "Edward," she said softly, "sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the people we love need us to make difficult choices to protect them. And sometimes it's too late to fix the mistakes." As Edward left the hospital in the early morning of New York, with the light rain soaking his wrinkled suit, he knew that Sarah had given him much more than a reprimand. She had given him a lesson about consequences, about how the decisions we make to protect the people we love can hurt them more deeply than the truth ever would. And for the first time in 15 years, Edward Smith wondered if his version of the story, where he was the tragic hero who sacrificed himself for the sake of the woman he loved, was just a convenient lie he had told himself. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he had simply chosen the easier path. And maybe it really was too late to change that. 3 weeks after the hospital episode, Sarah returned to work with a fierce determination to keep things exactly as they were before the conversation with Edward. Dr. Paula had cleared her return on the condition that she reduce her workload and avoid stressful situations, recommendations that Sarah followed religiously, but not for the reasons the doctor imagined. "How are you feeling, dear?" asked Ms. Carter on Monday morning, watching Sarah methodically organize her cleaning schedule. "Much better, thank you. The rest helped a lot." Sarah smiled, but Ms. Carter, with her experience in reading people, noticed that the smile didn't reach her eyes. In fact, Sarah had spent the 3 weeks away devising a military strategy for emotional survival. She created new schedules, new routes, new protocols that would minimize any possibility of a casual encounter with Edward. She talked at length with Lisa about the importance of keeping professional and personal information separate, and even considered asking for a transfer to another client of the cleaning company. But it was her pride that kept her from running away. Sarah Johnson had built a solid reputation based on competence and professionalism. She wasn't going to let a personal situation, no matter how complex, jeopardize her career. Edward, for his part, was fighting his own internal battles. The conversation in the hospital had been a brutal mirror, where he saw reflected all the justifications he had made. The words of Sarah, "Sometimes it's too late to fix mistakes," echoed in his mind during meetings, hearings, and the long nights working alone in the office. Dr. Edward, Jessica entered his office on a Thursday afternoon carrying a folder of documents. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Jessica, what's up?" "It's about the supervision of the cleaning staff," she said, sitting in the chair across from his desk with a carefully neutral expression. "I've been receiving some concerns." Edward lifted his eyes from the documents he was reviewing. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, some staff members mentioned that the cleaning manager has been very distant lately, avoiding contact, leaving early, not participating in company social events." Edward felt a pang in his stomach, but maintained a neutral expression. "Sarah has had some recent health issues. It's natural for her to be more cautious." Of course, Jessica quickly agreed. "But there have also been comments about the quality of work being compromised." "What comments?" "Some lawyers mentioned that their offices are not being cleaned with the same attention to detail as before. It might be wise to consider a change in supervision." Edward studied Jessica carefully. In 3 years of working with her, he had learned to recognize when she had a hidden agenda, and at that moment, she definitely did. "Jessica, which specific lawyers made these complaints?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, Dr. Martin mentioned that his file wasn't being organized properly. I'll speak to Dr. Martin personally about this. Edward interrupted, and I would like to see a detailed report of all these alleged complaints by the end of the week. Sure, Dr. Edward, I'm just trying to maintain the quality of the office. I know you are, and I appreciate your dedication, but I prefer to verify the information personally before making any decisions about personnel changes. After Jessica left, Edward sat for several minutes, drumming his fingers on the desk. He knew the political dynamics of a law firm well enough to know when someone was trying to sabotage another employee, and he had a very strong suspicion about the true motives behind Jessica's concerns. 2 hours later, Edward personally went down to the lower floors to speak with Dr. Martin, one of the senior partners. "Robert, can I talk to you about the cleaning staff?" Dr. Martin, a 65-year-old man with completely white hair and thick glasses, looked at Edward in surprise. "Cleaning staff? What about them?" "Jessica mentioned that you had some complaints about the organization of your file." "Complaints?" Dr. Martin laughed. "On the contrary, Edward, that new girl, Sarah, is excellent. My office has never been so organized. She even created a new system for the processes that is saving my secretary time." Edward felt a mix of relief and anger. "Thank you, Robert. I just wanted to confirm." In the following days, Edward made it a point to discreetly check with other partners and staff about Sarah's performance. All comments were consistently positive. Sarah not only maintained the usual standard of quality, but had also implemented significant improvements in various areas. It was the following Friday that Edward decided to confront Jessica directly. "Jessica, where is the report I asked for about the complaints regarding the cleaning staff?" She looked up from her computer, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm still compiling the information, Dr. Edward. It's interesting because I personally spoke with Dr. Martin and other colleagues this week. None of them made any complaints about Sarah Johnson. In fact, they all praised her work." Jessica's face turned red. "Maybe I misinterpreted some comments." "Jessica," Edward leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he used in court when he was about to expose a lying witness. "How long have you been working with me?" 3 years, Dr. Edward. "And in these 3 years, how many times have I had to question your competence or honesty?" "Never." "Exactly. That's why I'm giving you an opportunity to explain to me why you fabricated complaints about an exemplary employee." Jessica remained silent for long moments, clearly debating internally how much she should reveal. "Dr. Edward," she finally said, "I was just concerned about the workplace." "Workplace?" "I noticed tension between you and Sarah. I thought it might be better for everyone if she were transferred to another client." Edward leaned back in his chair, studying Jessica with a new perspective. "What kind of tension?" "Well, you clearly know each other, and since she arrived, you've been different." "Different how?" "Distracted, worried. It's unprofessional for a boss to get emotionally involved with subordinate employees." "Stop right there," Edward interrupted, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Are you insinuating that there is something inappropriate between me and Sarah?" "No, not exactly, but—" "Jessica, I will be very clear about one thing. Sarah Johnson is an exemplary professional who deserves respect and security in the workplace. If I find out that you are spreading insinuations about her or trying to sabotage her career in any way, I will consider that workplace harassment and take appropriate legal action." Jessica paled. "Dr. Edward, I would never. Furthermore," he continued, "lying to the boss about client complaints is a serious offense that can result in termination for cause. Do you understand the seriousness of the situation?" "Yes, sir." "Great. I don't want to hear another word about changes in the cleaning staff unless there are legitimate and documented reasons. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Dr. Edward. After Jessica left his office, Edward got up and went to the window overlooking the courtyard of the building. Down below, he could see Sarah overseeing two younger staff members cleaning the outdoor areas. Even nearly 6 months pregnant, she maintained the elegant posture and efficiency that had always characterized her. Edward realized he was facing a complex ethical dilemma. As an employer, he had the responsibility to protect Sarah from any form of harassment or sabotage in the workplace. But as the man who Sarah had loved and hurt, any action taken in her defense could be misinterpreted, both by other employees and by Sarah herself. It was then that she made a decision that would completely change the dynamics of the situation. The following Monday, Edward called a general meeting with all the office staff, lawyers, secretaries, support staff, and cleaning staff. I would like to take this opportunity, he said, standing in front of the main conference room, to officially recognize the exceptional work our cleaning staff has been doing, especially under the supervision of Sarah Johnson. Sarah, sitting at the back of the room next to Lisa, felt her heart race. She had not been informed that she would be mentioned publicly. Sarah has implemented several improvements in our organization and cleaning processes that have resulted in time savings and increased efficiency for all of us. As recognition, I announce that she is being promoted to General Cleaning Coordinator with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. The silence in the room was followed by enthusiastic applause. Sarah was in total shock. She had not requested a promotion, nor had she been consulted about changes in her position. Furthermore, Edward continued, Sarah will receive an expanded benefits package that includes a premium health plan, extended maternity leave, and childcare assistance for when the baby is born. After the meeting, as the employees dispersed, Sarah approached Edward with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Edward, Dr. Smith, she quickly corrected herself. Can I speak with you? Of course, my office. 5 minutes later, they were face to face again, but this time with a completely different dynamic. Why did you do this? Sarah asked directly. Because you deserve it, Edward replied simply. And because I realized some employees were unfairly questioning your work. Sarah studied him carefully. Does this have to do with our history? It has to do with professional justice, Edward said. But also, he paused, choosing his words carefully. It also has to do with the fact that I want to ensure you and your baby have security and stability, not as someone from your past, but as your responsible employer. Sarah remained silent for a few moments. Thank you, she finally said, for the promotion and the benefits. But Edward, this doesn't change anything between us. I know, he replied, and I wasn't expecting it to change. But when Sarah left his office, they both knew something had changed. Edward had proven, through concrete actions, that he was willing to put her well-being above any personal discomfort, and Sarah, for the first time since she had re-encountered him, wondered if perhaps there was more to his story than she had imagined. July arrived in Miami, bringing with it the coldest days of the year and a strangely comfortable routine for Sarah. The promotion had significantly changed her dynamics in the office. Now she had her own office on the 29th floor, equipped with a computer, phone, and a small meeting table, where she coordinated the activities of the 3 cleaning teams under her supervision. Ms. Johnson, you look like a real executive, joked Lisa one Tuesday morning, finding her friend reviewing supply spreadsheets in her new office. Sarah smiled, one hand resting on her 6.5-month belly. I'm still getting used to it, to be honest. Yesterday I dreamed I was cleaning my own office. The two laughed, but there was a genuine lightness in the air that hadn't existed for months. The promotion had given Sarah not only financial stability, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She discovered that she enjoyed the administrative part of the job, creating efficient schedules, training new staff, implementing quality protocols. "And how's the situation with you-know-who?" Lisa asked discreetly, closing the office door. "Professional," Sarah replied firmly. "He has kept his word. Since the promotion, our interactions are strictly about work." It was true. Edward had maintained a respectful distance, communicating with Sarah only through formal emails or meetings with other supervisors present. When they crossed paths in the hallways, they exchanged polite greetings. "Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Dr. Smith and Dee," and went their separate ways. But Lisa, with her keen intuition for human relationships, noticed details that Sarah preferred to ignore, like how Edward always discreetly asked about her well-being during general meetings, how he had personally approved the purchase of a special ergonomic chair for pregnant women for her office, how his eyes lingered for a fraction of a second longer when she passed by the reception. "Sarah," Lisa said, sitting in the chair in front of the desk, "can I give you advice from someone who's lived longer than you?" "Sure." "Sometimes, when we get hurt a lot, we build walls so high that we can't even see if the person on the other side has really changed." Sarah stopped typing and looked at her friend. "Lisa, I'm not saying you should forgive or forget," Lisa quickly continued. "I'm saying maybe observe. Dr. Edward is not acting like a man who abandoned a woman for ambition. He is acting like a man who carries a very heavy guilt." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. "Sarah Johnson." "Hi, Sarah. It's Brian." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had blocked Brian's number months ago, but he was calling from an unknown number. "Brian, I already told you I don't want—" "Sarah, please just listen to me for a minute. I'm here in Miami." "What?" Lisa noticed the immediate change in Sarah's expression and stood up, concerned. "I arrived yesterday. I'm staying at a hotel in the downtown area. I need to talk to you in person." "Brian, we have nothing to talk about. I made that very clear. It's about the baby, Sarah. I've changed my mind. I want to take responsibility." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "What do you mean?" "I want us to try again. I want to be a father. I want to take care of both of you. Can I meet you tonight? We can have dinner, talk properly." "No." "Sarah, I'm not going to meet you." "Brian, please. You've had 7 months to change your mind. 7 months during which I've built a stable life here. I don't need you anymore." "But it's my child." The phrase came out too loud, and Sarah noticed some people in the hallway turning their heads. "Brian, I'm hanging up now, and I don't want any more calls from you." "Sarah, if you don't want to talk nicely—" She hung up before he could finish the implied threat. "Who was that?" Lisa asked. "Brian, the father of the baby. He's in Miami and wants to talk." "Are you going?" "Of course not." Sarah ran her hands over her face, feeling a headache starting. "Lisa, can you give me a few minutes? I need to think." Lisa left, but not before giving her friend a comforting hug. Sarah tried to focus on work for the rest of the morning, but her mind was in turmoil. Why had Brian shown up now? What did he really want? And why had her first reaction been panic instead of relief? Around noon, she was heading out for lunch when she ran into Ms. Carter at the reception. "Sarah, dear, how are you?" "I'm fine, thank you, Ms. Carter." "Oh, before I forget, a guy came by earlier asking for you. He said he was a friend from Florida." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What guy?" "Handsome, well-dressed, curly hair. He said it was a surprise and asked me not to tell you he was here." Miss Carter frowned. But something seemed off about him. A woman my age develops an instinct for these things. What did he want to know? Your schedule, what floor you work on. I didn't tell him anything, of course. I said you were in a meeting and that he should call directly. Sarah felt invaded. Brian had come to her workplace, questioned colleagues about her, tried to find out her routine. Thank you for not giving out information, Miss Carter. You're welcome, dear. But is everything okay? You look pale. I'm fine. It's just complicated. Sarah left for lunch, feeling disturbed, glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see Brian appear at any moment. She ate quickly at a nearby sushi restaurant, constantly checking her phone for new calls. It was on her way back to the office that she saw him. Brian Carter was leaning against an imported car in front of the building, wearing a light blue suit and sunglasses, clearly waiting for her. At 32, he maintained the athletic physique that had initially attracted her, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who drew attention wherever he went. "Hi, Sarah." She stopped 3 meters away from him. "What are you doing here, Brian?" "We need to talk." He stepped away from the car, approaching slowly. "You didn't want to answer my call?" "Because I have nothing to say to you." "I'm sure you do." His tone was friendly, but there was something underneath that unsettled her. 7 months is a long time, Sarah. You've changed, I've changed. I've changed. Sarah crossed her arms, unconsciously protecting her belly. "Brian, you abandoned me when I was pregnant. You said I should solve the problem. How exactly has that changed me?" "I was scared, I admit. But now I understand that I ran away from the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah studied him carefully. Brian had always been charming, knowing exactly what to say to get what he wanted. But now, looking at him with the experience of 7 months of total independence, she saw the manipulation behind the sweet words. "Brian, I've built a life here. I have a job I love, financial stability, an apartment, and you think I can't offer better things?" He gestured to the car. "Sarah, I'm a partner in a digital marketing company. I can give you a house, security. I don't need you to give me anything. But our child needs a father." The phrase hit her like a punch. For months, Sarah had convinced herself that she would be enough to raise the child alone, that maternal love would compensate for the absence of a father. But there were moments when she saw complete families in the park, when she imagined explaining to her child why Daddy wasn't around, when she wondered if she was being selfish. "Brian," she said slowly, "you can't just show up and decide you want to be a father. It doesn't work that way." "But I can try to make amends." He took another step toward her. "Sarah, I love you. I've always loved you. It was fear that made me act that way." Sarah knew he was lying. Brian had never said he loved her during the 4 months they were together. He always talked about connection, chemistry, compatibility, but never love. "I don't believe you," she said simply. It was then that Brian showed his true face. "Sarah, I'm the biological father of this child. I have legal rights." "What rights? You signed a document renouncing paternity when you offered money for the abortion." Brian smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "That document is legally worthless, and I can prove that I tried to reach out several times, but you prevented me." Sarah felt a wave of panic. She didn't know exactly what Brian's legal rights were, but the way he spoke suggested he had consulted a lawyer. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to come back to Florida with me, for us to get married, to form a real family." "And what if I don't want to?" Brian moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Then I will file for paternity and shared custody. Our child will spend half the time in Florida with me. You'll have to explain to a judge why you kept the father from knowing his own child." Sarah felt her legs weaken. The idea of her baby being forced to travel between cities, of having custody shared with a man she didn't trust, was terrifying. "Think about it, Sarah," Brian said, returning to his sweet tone. "Why complicate things?" "Things?" We can be a happy family." He headed to the car, but before getting in, he turned one last time. "I'm at the Intercontinental Hotel until Friday. I'll wait for your call." Sarah stood on the sidewalk long after Brian's car disappeared into New York traffic. She felt small, vulnerable, completely unprepared to deal with complex legal threats. It was then that she realized where she was, in front of the building that housed one of the most respected law firms in New York. And for the first time in months, Sarah wondered if perhaps Edward could help her. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of growing anxiety. Every time the phone rang, every time someone knocked on her office door, her heart raced. She tried to focus on the monthly supply reports, but Brian's words echoed in her mind. Legal rights, shared custody, our child. At 5 in the evening, when the office traffic began to dwindle, Sarah made a decision she would have considered unthinkable in the morning. She went up to the 30th floor. "Is Dr. Smith in?" she asked Miss Carter, trying to keep her voice steady. "He is, dear, but he's in a video conference with clients from London. He should finish in about 15 minutes. Would you like to wait?" Sarah nodded and sat in the leather chairs in the reception area, her hands clasped over her belly. The baby was restless, kicking insistently as if sensing her tension. "Calm down, little one," she murmured, making circular motions over the fabric of her navy blue dress. "Mommy will sort this out." 15 minutes stretched into 25. Sarah was considering giving up when the door to Edward's office opened and he appeared, accompanying 2 middle-aged men toward the elevators. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Smith. We'll be in touch," one of them said with a British accent. "The pleasure was mine. Have a safe flight back to London." Only after the elevators closed did Edward notice Sarah sitting in the reception area. His expression shifted immediately from professional cordiality to concern. "Sarah, is something wrong?" Ms. Carter, who was organizing papers to leave, looked from one to the other. "I'll leave you two to talk. Good night." When they were alone in the reception area, Sarah stood up but hesitated before speaking. "I need advice, legal advice." Edward studied her carefully. He could see the tension in every line of her body, the way her hands trembled slightly. "Of course. Shall we go to my office?" 2 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other, Sarah in the visitor's chair, Edward behind his desk, maintaining the professional distance they had both established. "What happened?" he asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. "The baby's father showed up today, Brian. He's in New York and he's making threats." Edward felt an instant pang of anger but kept his expression neutral. "What kind of threats?" "Legal threats. He said he would file for paternity and request shared custody if I don't go back to Miami with him." "Can he do that?" "I don't know. That's why I'm here." Sarah leaned forward. "Edward, Dr. Smith, I know our situation is complicated, but you're the only person I know who understands the law. And I'm scared." The last phrase came out as a whisper, and Edward felt his heart constrict. Seeing Sarah, always so strong, so determined, admit vulnerability awakened a protective instinct in him that had lain dormant for 15 years. "Sarah, before anything else, I need to make it clear that I can guide you as a lawyer, but I can't officially represent you." "Why not?" "Conflict of interest. Our personal history could compromise my professional objectivity." Sarah nodded, disappointed, but not surprised. "But I can explain your rights and refer you to excellent family lawyers," Edward continued, "and I can do that right now if you want." For an hour, Edward methodically explained the legal aspects of Sarah's situation. Yes, Brian had rights as a biological father, but he couldn't simply demand that. She moved to Miami. No, a document renouncing paternity had no legal value unless formalized in a notary's office with witnesses. Yes, he could request shared custody, but he would have to prove it was in the child's best interest. The central issue, Edward explained, is that courts always prioritize the child's well-being. A father who abandoned the mother during pregnancy and only reappeared months later with threats does not have a very strong position. Sarah felt calmer with each piece of information, and if he files anyway, then you'll need a good family lawyer, and I know the best. Edward took a piece of paper and began jotting down names and phone numbers. Dr. Claudia Johnson is a specialist in family law, highly respected by judges. Dr. Robert Johnson has specific experience with contested paternity cases. He stopped writing and looked at Sarah. But Sarah, can I ask you a personal question? Sure. Did you ever love this man? The question caught her off guard. Sarah was silent for a few moments, considering how to respond. I thought I did, for a while, but now, looking back, I think I fell in love with the idea of being in love, the possibility of forming a family, of having someone by my side. She paused. After what happened between us, it took me a long time to trust someone again. Brian seemed safe. And now? Now I see that he never really knew me. If he did, he would know I would never accept emotional blackmail or threats. Edward finished writing the names and handed the paper to Sarah. Call one of these lawyers tomorrow. Explain the complete situation. And Sarah... Yes? If he bothers you again, if he shows up here at the office again, I want you to call me immediately. Edward, you don't have to... Yes, I do, he interrupted firmly. As your employer, I have a responsibility for your safety in the workplace. Work. And as someone who cares about you, I won't just stand by and watch you be threatened. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the way he said, someone who cares, that resonated differently from all their other formal interactions over the past few months. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for the guidance, for the promotion, for caring. Edward stood up. When she did, but before Sarah reached the door, he said, Sarah, can I ask you one last thing? She turned around. If it weren't for our history, if we were just boss and employee, would you have come to ask me for help? Sarah considered the question honestly. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I would have tried to handle it on my own, like I always have. Then maybe our history has served some purpose after all. That night, Sarah called Dr. Claudia Johnson and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. She felt more confident than she had all day, not just because she had legal guidance, but because she had discovered that she could still count on Edward when she truly needed it. The next day, armed with her lawyer's advice, Sarah called Brian. Have you changed your mind? He asked hopefully. No. I called to give you some legal information that I thought you would want to know. She calmly explained that she had consulted a lawyer, that she knew her rights, and that any attempt at blackmail or coercion would be documented and used against him in court. Moreover, she added, I found out that threatening a pregnant woman can be considered psychological violence. Quite interesting. Brian's tone changed completely. Sarah, you don't understand. I just want what's best for our child. Then prove it. File for parenthood if you want. Establish child support. Build a respectful relationship with me as the mother of your child. But stop trying to control me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You've really changed, Brian finally said. Yes, Sarah agreed. I have. She hung up, and for the first time in months felt completely in control of her own life. Brian left New York the next day without filing any lawsuit. Apparently, his intimidation strategy had been just that, a strategy to avoid real legal responsibilities. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a bank transfer from Miami, the first child support payment, deposited promptly every 15th, accompanied by a formal request to meet the baby after birth. "I think he got the message," she told Lisa, showing her the bank receipt. "And you, did you get any message?" Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sarah, when you were desperate, scared, needing help, who did you turn to?" Sarah didn't answer, but she knew exactly where Lisa was going with this. She had turned to Edward, instinctively, naturally, as if 15 years hadn't passed. And maybe that meant something.